Welcome back. In a moment, we'll continue our conversation on equal pay. But first, some other news stories to keep an eye on. A US submarine has arrived in South Korea as tensions are rising between the North and the South. A nuclear-powered submarine will join a group of incoming warships led by the American aircraft carrier Carl Vinson. The anti-government protests are continuing in Venezuela, where 3 weeks of violence and unrest have led to the deaths of more than 20 people. Recent demonstrations were sparked by a Supreme Court decision to reduce the power of the opposition-dominated National Assembly. And memorials are taking place all over the world to mark Anzac Day. It's a day of remembrance for the soldiers of Australia and New Zealand who've died in the service of their countries. More now on the gender pay gap around the world and the reasons behind it. Have a look at this chart, which comes from the European Union. Regular report across European countries and Norway, which measure the income discrepancies. And here's the comparison they found. The EU average in the middle of the screen in dark blue at 16.7%. On the right-hand side, Estonia does worst, a difference of 28.1%. While on the left of picture, countries where there are smallest differences include Romania, 4.5%, and Luxembourg on 5.4%. Well, earlier we heard from Patrick Woodman of the Chartered Management Institute. He says it's important to lessen any discrimination that can easily punish those women who take a career break to have a family.
I think smart organisations recognise that they need to do much more to make it possible for people, both mums and dads, to combine a good family life with a good career, because they're losing out on talented people if they make it impossible to have that balance. So what you see is organisations focusing at the minute on making it much easier for people to return to work, changing the culture so it doesn't become a badge of honour that you have to be there every hour from dawn till dusk. Actually, it's okay to go and have commitments outside of the workplace. And that, I think, is about organisations recognising that they benefit from having talented people at all stages of life in the organisation and able to continue their careers because they're going to be the leaders of the future.
Well, still with us is Belinda Phipps, who is for the chair of the Fawcett Society, the UK's leading charity for campaigning for gender equality and women's rights. And joining us by Skype now is the economist Guy Shon. Guy, is it possible to quantify how much damage is done to the economy by discrimination in the workplace against women?
It's a huge factor. I think if you look at the numbers, the uncomfortable truth is that really we haven't made much progress at all on this issue in the last sort of 10 or 20 years. You know, if you look at the World Economic Forum data from last year, you know, we're roughly where we were back at the height of the financial crisis in 2008 when it comes to disparity on pay. For me, taking the same approach, just making small iterative increases to the same strategy, clearly isn't going to deliver very much very quickly. And I think, you know, most economic indicators say that if we don't radically change what we're doing, then we're going to be looking at sort of 2060, 2070, 2080 even before we actually close this gap.
What radical changes do you think are needed?
There is a beacon of hope if you look at the way that entrepreneurialism, startup culture is changing the way the world is doing business. So, you know, there are millions and millions of entrepreneurs now who are sick and tired of living within the restrictions and the slow pace of corporate culture change and are breaking out and starting their own enterprises. And if you look at if you just focus on women who run and own their own businesses. So the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, an organization, found last year that there are 126 million women now running their own business all over the world. And if you look at the number of those businesses that have been running for over 3 years, well, that's up at around 100 million. So I think startups are great because they create new jobs, but they also allow people to shape their own job a little bit more, free from these decades of cultural bias that you get in big corporate organizations.
Belinda, could that, if you like, force the corporate companies around the world to change their recruitment and retention practices if all the talent says, I'm not working for a company, I'll work for myself?
I think that will certainly have a big effect, but actually I think men can have a big effect too, because we've been talking about sort of pay gap and pay discrimination, and that's sort of what quite often is talked about in terms of problems for women. But we don't very often talk about the problems that men have, which is they are roundly discriminated against in the domestic sphere and as parents. They're often regarded as second-class citizens as parents. They don't get the same amount of paternity leave. And men themselves are realising that that is something that they miss out on, that you don't have a rounded full life unless you are domestically engaged, be able to do some volunteering and be, if you're a parent, be a parent and a carer. So I think you'll find men more and more demanding that they want equality on that side of things too. And it does make sense for women to be equal in the workplace and men to have more equality in the home. Added to which, if you want to be equal in the workplace, you cannot do that and carry 100% of the domestic responsibilities. So I think companies will see what women entrepreneurs are doing. They are shaping the workplace. But they will also feel the demands from both men and women for more flexible work, or even a shorter working week, so that we can all live more rounded lives. I mean, here in the UK, we used to work a 6-day week, and the trade unions moved it to a 5-day week. Maybe it's time not just to go flexible, but to go fewer hours altogether.
And how would you think about addressing the problem of parenting? Now, until biologically men can start having the children, there's always going to be a challenge for a woman having to take at least some time away from the workplace to give birth and to raise the child in its first few weeks. How would you say companies need to do more to address a return to work, maybe tightening up on skills or catching up on anything they've missed, rather than just, as what often seems to happen, they fall into a less responsible, poorly paid job?
It's a biological fact of life that women physically have the children and physically have the equipment to feed babies, and so due allowance needs to be made for that. Women are, after all, doing work that's important for society. We need our future workers to be born. But it's really important, and the evidence would suggest that babies benefit from a relationship with more than just their mother, with their father as well. And to have that relationship, men need to have time. Here in the UK, we have particular rules over paternity leave, and what really ought to happen is men ought to have the same as women in terms of time off immediately after the birth. So in the UK, women are not allowed to work in the workplace for 2 weeks after a baby's born, or 6 weeks in a factory. We should be doing the same for men, and we should also be making sure that parents can share parental leave. In the Scandinavian countries, what they have is a use it or lose it paternity leave. So there's 3 months of leave that the father can take, and if he doesn't take it, it cannot be transferred to the mother. And that's an effective way of helping men, encouraging men to do that. If you involve a man early on when his baby is tiny, newborn, in baby care, it helps him build a relationship with that baby and renew his relationship with his partner, which benefits the whole family, and it does enable the female part of the workforce to be freed up to be economically active.
Guy Shun, what about the challenge then for men to spend more time taking their side of the parenting question? There must be an economic cost for that, isn't it? Because a lot of companies are running profits quite tight to the wind. If they free up talent to go and do more with their families, aren't they at risk of losing profits, failing?
Well, I think that's been the perception for a long time. I think one of the things that might be changing that equation is the advances that technology have made on the way in which we work. So there are now many more of us who are working remotely, and there are many more of us who, frankly, are younger. So we look at Generation Z, millennials now, and the way that they want to work and want to be seen to be operating in the workplace. There's a very marked difference in the culture that millennials bring into the working environment. I think you combine that with what's happening with technology, and I think that also provides a ray of hope for how we might make things easier, not just for women but also for men. And I think it's absolutely right to point to some great success stories from some of the Scandinavian countries about how we can get more balance into our lives as well as in the workplace.
And Belinda, tell me about the sort of gender-specific roles, or what traditionally have been regarded as that. I mean, for decades, the sort of caring industries like nursing and so on have been presumed to have a predominance of female employees. Is that changing?
It is changing, but only very slowly, because women are still being brought up very differently from men. So the presumption with women is they will be interested in caring. Going through the school system, any careers advice that women get is directing them in that direction. In terms of, you can see it with the apprenticeships. Women are much more likely to be directed into a hairdressing apprenticeship than a plumbing apprenticeship.
Really?
But
even today?
Even today.
Around Europe today?
That is the case.
Okay.
So apprenticeships have always been thought of as a male thing, and although they shouldn't be now, that is still happening. There's even a pay gap within apprenticeships between men and women, which is astonishing.
So it starts right now. And yet, as we saw in our film, you know, there are some dramatic changes. Women can go and fight for their country, not in every European country or every country around the world, but in many, that is the case. Are they important as they signpost to others? A sort of equal treatment? Absolutely,
equal treatment, equal opportunity to go and do the job that you are skilled and equipped to do. And, you know, whilst being in the army wouldn't be my choice, it is some women's choice, and they absolutely should have that choice. The same with men in caring roles. Male teachers, male nurses, male carers often find their lives made a little bit more difficult because of the gender stereotypes. And we are more and more aware that the gender stereotypes are a construct. They're a nonsense. They don't have much basis in reality. So why let them guide us as to what careers you do? If the job roles were more evenly split, that would be a significant factor in changing the pay gap, because those caring roles are by and large paid much less than other sorts of roles traditionally done by men.
Belinda Phipps of the Fawcett Society, thank you. And Guy Shon, thank you for your contribution as well. Now, we end the programme as ever with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel you should know. In the past, transporting goods between China and Europe by freight train has always been a one-way trip. Containers full of Chinese goods arrive at European borders before making the return journey empty. But since the beginning of this year, that's all changed. The first train carrying European goods to China has arrived after making the 12,000-kilometre journey from London. It's carrying some 41 containers, weighing approximately 210 tonnes, and has travelled through 9 countries on 2 continents on the way to its destination. And that's all from me for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.